So, welcome to another edition of the Influence Global podcast, and I'm delighted to have somebody from across the pond, and that is no other than Aaron Templar. Hello, Aaron. Lovely to see you.
Thank you, Gordon. Lovely to see you too. Thanks for having me. It's a real privilege.
Well, the privilege is all mine because you are an author like me, but you have won 7 awards. You've just told me before this, which is quite incredible. But interestingly enough, not necessarily from the marketing community. So just before we get into the deep dive of relationships and social media and what your thoughts are of you, tell us a little bit about the book.
Yeah, thanks, Gordon. It was a real rewarding experience to write. It's my first one. I took some concepts that I've been speaking with and speaking on, I should say, for some time around social media marketing, which I think there's a lot of really strong biases in the marketing community when it comes to social media marketing that sort of prevents us from seeing what the data shows is rather contrary to the way we tend to think of it as marketers in terms of an effective tactic across the marketing disciplines. And I spent a lot of time directing the marketing in a business school and learned quite a bit about leadership. Sort of the core of that branding or their brand promise was leadership. And it just occurred to me at one point that really what we're talking about when we're talking about influencing social groups is really a leadership discipline of building social capital. It's not a marketing one. And in fact, marketing or social constructs tend to reject marketing often. And I think the data kind of backs that up. So I spend the first half of the book sort of deconstructing social media marketing, trying to challenge those biases with a lot of research or in terms of its efficacy. And then the second half of the book is how to be a leader and lead folks in social constructs by way of building social capital. So a little bit different against the grain, I think, especially for agencies like mine that appreciate the billable hours of social media marketing. And then there's a chapter really that is very strongly tied to influencer marketing, which maybe we can dive into as we go along.
Yeah, well, that's really interesting because one of the things that I think is interesting, people ask me what is influencer marketing, and so often I say to them, well, it's nothing new. It's just a word of mouth marketing where we trust the opinions of others more than we do traditional advertising. And I think one of the things that really comes over the most successful, influential people in life are those that exude trust. So I wanted to get your views around how important you think, uh, some influencers perhaps have really nailed it when it comes to trust, and others haven't.
That's interesting. Yeah, the idea of trust in the social sciences when it comes to building social capital is so integral to social capital that it's both the input and the output. It's necessary to build it, but you also use it to measure whether or not you're building social capital. So the idea of trust and building trust has to, like I said, very integral and intertwined. It starts and ends with trust in terms of influencing groups and social structures and there's really three different types of what I call bonds that leaders focus on when building social capital intentionally. Cognitive bonds, so those kinds of terms and phrases and projects and so on that we sort of connect to in social groups when we come together. Relational bonds, so a lot of that is reciprocity and sharing and kind of receiving what we signed up for in terms of the value. And then there's the structural bonds. So leaders pay attention specifically to the different nodes in their network, and they recognize that these nodes have different types of influences and return different kinds of value, which influencer marketers are just kind of plugged into. But the idea of trust, if without trust, it kills social capital. And you've probably seen a lot of this in the influencing marketing world when you've got an influencer that comes across as affectatious or false or doesn't believe in what it is that they're talking about. It can actually do damage to a brand, quite the opposite of what you're trying to achieve.
Well, I remembered actually during the pandemic, where there were a number of stories in the UK headlines about influencers in Dubai, making some irresponsible comments about the fact that I've not been able to this is only my third holiday this year, or something around the fact that, you know, they were on the beach and it was difficult to be trapped there and whatever. And, you know, it was so insensitive, given that people over here weren't allowed to leave their own buildings and stuff like that. So, you know, it's also about being ethical, and you know, having this sense of empathy as well when it comes to social capital, doesn't it? Understanding and feeling for your audience. What's your thoughts around that?
Oh, absolutely. I think again, you don't even have to, think of this in terms of building relationships. The science backs it up. There's Christakis and Fowler wrote that very famous book, Connected. I'm not sure if you've read it before, but really powerful in terms of the science of how influence works in these social groups. And I've created in the book, I created 5 different rules for focusing on the structure of networks. And one of those is to remember that we're connected by 6 degrees. So the whole famous, 6 degrees of separation, but we're only influenced by 3. So typically we need a pretty tight or a pretty close relationship in order to be moved by something. So if you're trying to do some influencer marketing and using a node in your network to drive influence, you have to build the kind of trust that would be the same as 3 degrees of separation within a social network. So yeah, the science absolutely backs up, I think, what you as an expert in influencer marketing know.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's why LinkedIn, of course, has been so successful as a platform in itself, hasn't it? Because of those that are in your first and then the second connection, and being able to connect and introduce people together is a very, very powerful way. I love that when I'm introducing somebody to somebody else within my community. Equally, I hate it when I've just connected to somebody and straight away they're into trying to sell me and pitch me an idea, because
right.
they haven't built that sense of relationship, and it's like straight into the selling process.
That's right. Yeah, and credibility is one of the cornerstones to building kind of trust. And the sort of surefire way to kill credibility is to say one thing and do another. So, hey, Gordon, let's connect on LinkedIn and really help each other's network. And then you say yes to me, and then I start selling you my book or something is not exactly what I promised. So credibility erodes that right away. And again, if we look at it in terms of a leadership through kind of that leadership prism instead of a sales, marketing, build an audience prism, these things become very self-evident.
And I always talk about a brand is what somebody says about you when you're in the room, when you're not in the room, rather. And of course, that is what influence really is, isn't it? Is being able to not just tell somebody what you think you are, but actually have other people get a view and perspective. And when they're sharing, your credentials, or why somebody should want to work with you, then you've really nailed it. Do you agree with that?
Oh, sure. Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. In fact, we're probably again, the research and science of social constructs and the social sciences back this up. We are more likely to engage with people who are just upfront about it. So, hey, Gordon, I want to sell you my book and come on your podcast goes off a lot better than trying to, hey, let's network and add value to each other and all that kind of stuff, and then I sneak in the sales pitch later. So
that's a good point, actually. Yeah, that's rather than what we call in England dance around the pin.
I like that saying.
Just get to the point. Yeah,
dance around the pin. I'm going to steal that. That's great.
But equally, you are influential in your own right by being an author. So one of the things I was just going to ask you about is, by writing the book, did you, and I'm sure it was a fascinating experience because you've put a lot of research and time, and you've spoken to many others in relation to that. How do you think being an individual thought leader is linked to writing a book, for example?
That's a good question. I don't know, Gordon. I don't think I wrote it to be that. I don't have a desire to be sort of the author, speaker, influencer, thought leader person. I wanted to kind of pursue an intellectual curiosity I had, and I wanted to see what it was like to write a book. I like to write and wanted to go through the process. So I think that, the outcome of writing the book is probably very different than trying to be an influencer. I think it adds some credibility, although I have to tell you, again, in marketing circles, I don't know that it necessarily has. I think a lot of people, because of what I would argue are very strong biases and industry forces that want us to believe in the efficacy of social media marketing. I'm pausing. Somebody's moving their trash can outside my window. I hope that isn't coming across. I don't know if you're hearing that or not.
No, it didn't come across at all, so that was fine.
Okay, sorry about that. All right, good. I'll start again then, from picking up from there. In marketing circles, yeah, I think the biases are so strong and the industry forces are so strong to keep people into this sort of loop. I heard in a podcast you talked about being an influencer is a flywheel, a hamster on a wheel. I think the guy that won Big Brother. Social media marketing is a lot like that. Got to get more, got to do this, got to continue to feed it, and it's a machine that sort of ends up circling quite a bit. So all of that to say, it just builds really strong biases, and I'm not sure that it's built necessarily my influence within marketing circles.
No, but I agree with you. Look, I'm somebody that advocates influencer marketing, but I also would say that I'm you can see by my silver hair here, I'm no spring chicken. I really believe in the principle of building strong relationships with people. Some of the best events that I've ever had have been a Zoom call with 7 or 8 people on it.
Right.
It's or having a private dinner with a group of people for 2 or 3 hours. So lots can come from that. It's not necessarily. It really depends on what you're trying to achieve at the end of the day, isn't it? And being, as you said, very clear about what the outcome is. And how you want your audience to perceive you. But I also think we live in a world where authenticity rules. We don't want to see the bullshit anymore, and particularly in certain industries. I mean, gaming, for example. Oh my goodness, if you try and advertise or slip an advert into a game, you will get huge amounts of kickback from their audience, because they see it as a disruption. And so I think marketeers have really got to understand that it's still about people, isn't it?
Right. No, for sure. I think that especially when you talk about social constructs and asking people to do the influencing for you, if you want to call that influencer marketing, or whether you want to call it building social capital and being a leader within social constructs, you have to think more about connections and less about conversions. And the value will follow. I think that's the thing too, Gordon. You touched on this. A Zoom call with 7 people can be more effective or more valuable than a Facebook page with 30,000, because this is where marketing and leadership kind of come head to head. Marketers think audiences, and there's no value in a network. Just to explore this a little bit. We've seen, this sort of return to work after COVID discussion going on, and you can actually build quite a bit of trust by allowing employees to work remotely. And so you can generate value in networks regardless of where they are and what they look like. But likewise, you can have a giant network that's not delivering any value if there's nothing being exchanged within the nodes. So what matters is the action that happens within the network, not the network itself. And that's a really big difference, I think, between looking at this as a leader and looking at it as a marketer, thinking about connections, less about conversions.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. Are there any examples that come to mind that as part of your research that you thought, wow, that's a really great individual, or that's a great organization who are really embracing this?
Yeah, I looked at a couple in my book and in the research that stand out. And they're all sort of, I intentionally wanted to look for sort of smaller examples, instead of talking about the Dove campaigns and these giant, budgets that are sort of out of reach for most of us. So they're a little bit smaller examples. One of them, and by the way, I should say that they both reflect, I was listening to one of your podcasts, I think it was the same one, where you were at a conference and you were talking with some people and getting kind of some quotes. And you spoke with somebody, I think, named Nave Sagru. Did I get that name right? I couldn't find it in the show notes or anything, where she talked about 73% of all of the, in her research, all of the influencer marketers say that they're very hands-on with their network. And I found that to be completely true in the research that I did. So a couple of examples. One was Xbox. We talked to the people who do customer support in social media specifically, and the director of that. And the way that they build, and they've got this just incredible loyal group of people who basically do the work for them. They are out there helping people solve problems and overcome technical challenges and so on. And yeah, they are completely hands-on. They get to know and learn who are most active, where their areas of expertise are. They brought them in to speak at conferences. They, kind of elevate them as authorities in these different places, specifically for the areas that they're experts in, not just in general. So they're very hands-on. That's one, I think, really good example of that. The other example is letting the curse words fly. Back to your sort of point about authenticity, that can mean a lot of different things. And in this sort of gaming world, if you're too buttoned up, people kind of see that you're the corporate people, you're not the gamers. So they really had to let a lot of their Microsoft level of tolerance for that kind of thing go. So the Xbox folks were a really good example. There's a few more, but I wanted to just emphasize that idea that you have to get hands-on. And I think that's, again, if you look at it through the leadership prism, very important. Leaders know exactly who are in their networks and how they can curate them.
Yeah. I mean, who do you look up to? Who do you find is fairly influential in your life?
Wow, that's a good question. I suppose it depends on sort of where. I'm a hobby musician, so there's some musicians and artists that I really respect, because they just sort of live a life of creating all the time. In the marketing world, I tend to gravitate toward people who go against the grain. I think there's some really wonderful AI thinkers right now who are thinking about AI in terms of the ethics that I really respect. There's a podcast called Tech Won't Save Us. Maybe you listen to that brings a lot of them on. Names are escaping me, Gordon. I'm sorry, I don't have them at the top of my tongue, but it's usually people who, like me, kind of want to go against the grain on some of this stuff.
Well, the reason I ask that question is because so often we are, and sometimes people will even say their dad, it's somebody that's very, very close to them. But equally, it could be somebody that changed the direction in their life in some way. But it's somebody that they've had a very, very personal relationship with. And obviously, we talk all about influence here, and I'm always fascinated by who has got the ability to change the behavior of others in some shape or form. And the fact that you are connected with people that go against the grain, you've almost demonstrated what I hoped you'd say is that we follow our tribes, don't we? We like to feel comfortable with people that are like-minded and like us. And did you talk about that at all in the book, about the tribal impact of social capital?
Yeah, didn't use that terminology necessarily, but I think that there's the leadership literature and there's volumes of it, of course, out there is pretty clear that there's sort of a very common thread through all of it, which if there's one thing that any kind of leadership science or thought leader on the subject could agree on, it's that this idea that we willingly follow people who walk the talk. So yes. Back to your point of authenticity, and to recognize that then becomes sort of our social group, our tribe, if you want to call it that. We start to see and gravitate toward people who are like us, or at least sort of share those values. So I think it's probably an overly complicated way of explaining what you're talking about, but it's really quite true. And again, the science is very clear. We willingly follow people that do that. I think the other thing that the leadership sciences will tell us is that people who we willingly follow typically challenge the status quo. And I think that is a clear reflection that people are willing to put something at risk in order to be themselves and to stand up for what's right, which then generates that kind of energy to want to follow somebody like that. And that's probably the pressure that underpins this idea of going against the grain. I just tend to be influenced by people who are putting something personal at risk to bring something to light.
I totally agree with you. And that's why sometimes politicians are not necessarily trusted, because they're towing a company line, that they are fed by a PR machine. And it's, and I think in this day and age, we're just fed up with that. We want the independent voice. We want to be, don't we? We want to be inspired by those that are going to make our lives better or something, or connect with us, or inspire us in another way. Amazing. Well, look, it's been really fascinating talking to you today. It really, really has. How can people find out more about you, or indeed buy your book, Aaron?
Yeah, I'm just at aarontempler.com. Everything could be right there. It's AARON. And then Templar, for some reason, when my folks came across the pond, they dropped the AR and went with ER. So it's Templar. I think in the UK, everyone's used to the Knights of Templar with an A, but it's ER. So aarontempler.com, everything is there. I really appreciate this, Gordon. Thank you for the kind of platform to jump on here and chat a little bit.
No, it's lovely, and well done on achieving all of the awards. That's very impressive, and I think it's just testament to what the book is all about. So
thank you.
I wish you well.
Thank you so much. Likewise. And yeah, this has been fun to discover the podcast too. There's a lot of excellent experts. It's a real privilege to be up here with all of them.
Thank you.